Welcome. My name is Ken Conley. I'm standing in London, England, and I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about bloodshed, about men burning at a stake, about mystery, about intrigue, about spying. I want to tell you a story about courage and commitment. I want to tell you the story of this book. I'm standing by the River Thames, and behind me is Hampton Court, a building that pictures the excesses of the age in which it was built. It was built by Cardinal Wolsey back at the time of the Reformation. And at that time, when it was completed, it was the largest building that was in the British Empire. It has 1,000 rooms. It took 2,500 workmen to be able to put it together. It takes 500 people to be able to keep it. It had 250 tons of lead pipe that brought special water into it, and that was an unheard of thing in that day. But it was in the same place on Monday, on January the 6th in 1604, that James I, the new King of England, had been meeting with 50 to 60 prelates, trying to resolve problems that were in the church at that time. They knew King James would want a new translation. But that's not the first translation of the Bible into English. For that, we've got to go back 230 years. This church is located in Lutterworth in England. It's only a village, but it's 700 years of age. Back in 1374, Dr. John Wycliffe, who was the president of the Balliol College in Oxford, became the pastor of this church. John Wycliffe made such an impression that he left his influence on generations to come. Many things may have caused that influence, but one is notable. He gave us, for the first time we ever had one, a Bible in English. That Bible wasn't taken from the Greek or the Hebrew because nobody in England knew Greek or Hebrew. Latin was the religious language of that day, and he just simply translated from Latin, but into the language that common people would understand. And then he gave that Bible to his Lollard preachers, and he sent them out to teach the people in the marketplaces and in the fields what it meant to have a message from God in the Bible. Significant thing about the Bible was that it was handwritten. It took 10 months to make one copy. And for one copy, it would cost £40 to be able to buy it. Now, £40 then is not what it is today. They must have written so many of these that they were spread all over the country, burned wherever they were found, and yet, today there's 170 copies still surviving. There were so many of John Wycliffe's preacher boys who gave their lives for their faith that over in the city of Norwich, for example, they called the place of public execution the Lollards Pit. But they didn't get the courage to take up the body of John Wycliffe for 44 years. Then they took it out of its grave and they burned the bones to ashes, and they took the ashes and they emptied them here into the River Swift. They were intending that they would close the door on his influence. But look what they really symbolically did. This River Swift flows into the Avon. The Avon flows into the Severn. The Severn flows into the Bristol Channel, and the Bristol Channel empties out into the oceans of the world. In fact, symbolically, they opened the doors and let his influence out. In the 100 years that followed the death of Wycliffe, There were two momentous events that occurred. The first of these was the fall of Constantinople. When it fell, Greek culture started moving toward the west, and people in Europe began to learn a Greek language. In universities all over Europe, they started majoring, specializing in the teaching and learning of Greek. The second major event that happened the following year. It was the invention of the Gutenberg press with movable print. When that occurred, they began to have the ability to print things they had not been previously able to do, and the first thing that they printed was a Latin Bible. Of course, it brought freedom, but not freedom for everybody. The limited freedom that it brought was in the academic world, but they were still committed in the religious world that there would be no Bible in the vernacular of the people. They were not going to allow a Bible to be printed in English, since in 1407 they had passed a law forbidding it, and they were not going to rescind that law. That makes this famous Tower of London, which is just behind me here, not so famous in that day. It was infamous because its rooms were filled with people. Many of them were burned to death, and where they were burned is only about 2 miles away from here, in a place called Smithfield. It was right here in this area where they put the stakes, and then they built the timber around the stakes. They would bring the person and chain them to the stake and then ignite the timber, and their flesh would literally burn until they died. Those dear people died in order that you and I might have an English Bible in our hands. You can't help but being emotional standing on a spot where these things occurred, because I think of all the good people that died here, men like John Lambert. Because Lambert, if you remember, is the man when the flames came up over his head, in order to try and communicate with the people in an area that then was wide open fields and thousands of people were here. He put his hands as high he could put them and projected his fingers. Flames came from his fingers while he cried, "None but Christ, none but Christ." This is not the only place where men gave their lives for the faith. For example, on April the 4th in 1519, in a place called Little Park in Coventry, not very many miles from here, there were 6 working men. 3 of them were just shoemakers, and a woman. And they were publicly executed by burning to death. For what? Because they taught their children the Lord's Prayer in English. Now that's remarkable when you realize that something significant happened only 2 years before that in Cambridge. It was during the persecution of those days by the leading religious authorities against any expression of religion in any other language except Latin that a young man named Thomas Bilney used to walk these streets in Cambridge. He had been soundly converted to Christ by reading the Greek New Testament of Erasmus, and immediately trying to share his faith had gone to the White Horse Inn, where the sophists of his generation used to meet. It was the Mars Hill. The end result of his meeting there was that many of the leading professors at Cambridge University here were being converted to Christ. That immediately attracted attention. And among the people that came from different parts of England to this university was a young man named William Tyndale. He was an excellent Greek scholar. In fact, he was so well versed with 7 different languages that no stranger could determine which one was his native tongue. And he was a very committed man. In an argument one day, his debater said, "We had better be without God's law than the Pope's." Tyndale fired back at his opponent, "I defy the Pope and all his laws. And if God spare me, I will one day make the boy that drives the plough in England to know more of the Scripture than the Pope does." These are the fields on which Tyndale watched commoners ploughing constantly. They're situated on the Cotswin Hills, and that is the Severn Valley. It's little Sodbury Manor, owned in those days by Sir John Walsh. Walsh lived here with his wife and his 2 boys, and Tyndale was hired to become the tutor of those 2 boys. This little attic room happens to be the private room of William Tyndale while he worked for the Walsh family. Here he slept, and here he kept his books, and here he studied. The idea came to him that if the Greek New Testament had such a profound effect upon the scholastic world, what would an English Bible do for plowboys? At this very spot, he decided he was going to translate the Greek New Testament into English. He worked on the project while he was here for 6 months. Then he realized that it was jeopardizing the Walsh family's life. So he left here and he went to London. He tried to get the Bishop of London, Bishop Tunstall, to give him official permission for what he was doing, but Tunstall would not do it. So he self-imposed an exile on himself, went over to the continent, met with Martin Luther, and found a great friend in Luther. He finished the work of translation and then started on the problem of having it printed. That was a very difficult problem for him to solve because the English had decided they were going to do everything to make it impossible. They put a price on his head. And so he lived in poverty, crisscrossed his paths. He was on one occasion, they were coming in the front door to arrest him in the print shop when he gathered whatever documents he could and went out into the night in the back door. And he lived like that. But one holy passion gave him and made him indefatigable in his energy. He wanted to finish this work. And eventually in December of 1525, his work was completed. And a new phase began. How is he going to get these Bibles smuggled into England? Would you believe that that all has something to do with this? A bag of flour? I'm standing now where the Port of London was in the days of William Tyndale. It was run by German authorities, and if you remember, Tyndale spent 6 months here before his self-exile over to the continent, and during that time he didn't waste it. He became acquainted with these authorities. He got to know them so well that they would help him when he wanted to get his Bibles into this country. Or the flour. Well, that came into this port as well. It was in sacks. And in the middle of those sacks of flour, Tyndale's Bibles. They came in such a large number, they spread all over the country and took England like a shock wave. It's a little bit ironic, but right across the street, he stands in the form of a statue, and he's looking down right on the place where his Bibles were smuggled into this country. Thousands and thousands of his Bibles came into England. But why, today, is there only one completed copy of that 1526 New Testament? A man named Tunstall was the Bishop of London at the time of William Tyndale, and he was Tyndale's bitter enemy. He did everything that he could to frustrate what Tyndale had in mind, and whenever he could find one of the Bibles, he would bring it here to St. Paul's Cathedral and ceremoniously put it on fire. It was here that he fervently preached against what William Tyndale was trying to accomplish. He was so frustrated that he decided he would go to the extreme measure of getting all the money available he could get, go over to the continent and buy all the Bibles to be bought and bring them all here, burn them, and that would be the end of it all. He had a man by the name of Augustine Pakistan, and Pakistan was a merchantman that did a lot of trade over there. He asked Pakistan if he would arrange to buy all the Bibles that he could find. Pakistan agreed. But what Tunstall didn't know, Pakistan was a friend of William Tyndale's. When he bought the Bibles, he paid 4 times the price of a Bible in order to buy one, allowing Tyndale to reprint 3 in place of it. And so it turned out to be that the very man who was trying to destroy the project was actually paying the cost of it. However, in 1535, Tyndale was captured. It was a friend that betrayed him. He spent 1.5 years in the castle at Volvord, working on the translation of the Old Testament. That was his life's passion, and he couldn't get away from it. And then in October of 1536, they took him out to die. He was tied to a stake where the timber was around to ignite and burn him to death. But there's another part to that. They put 2 holes in the stake. They threaded a piece of wire through those holes that went around the throat of Tyndale, and they determined that he would die by strangulation as well as by burning at the same time. The last chapter in a great man's life. And the last words that he spoke just before, when the flames were coming up and before they pulled the wire: "Lord, open the eyes of the King of England." We've been looking at the struggles we've gone through in order to get an English Bible. We've gone back to the days of John Wycliffe. We've gone through the days of William Tyndale. And remember William Tyndale's last and closing prayer, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes"? That was very quickly answered by the Lord, because a man working with him by the name of John Rogers picked up his pen, finished the translation of Hebrew in the Old Testament, and then took the documents and of all places sent them to England. And when the printer received them, he was so impressed by them, he sent them to the Archbishop of Canterbury in an effort to get approval to have them openly published. The Archbishop of Canterbury attempted to get the King of England to approve it, and he accomplished it. And it's really a miracle, because if you look at the end of the book of Malachi, William Tyndale's initials are as big as they can be. A man that was persecuted by the King of England and now approved for publication with his initials on it. However, there were footnotes, and they were very strong. In fact, they were so strong that the Secretary of State was afraid the king would withdraw approval unless they were changed. So another Bible had to be brought about. Miles Coverdale had taken and edited that edition, had softened the footnotes, and what's called the Great Bible was then published. The Great Bible was required by the King of England to be posted in every parish church, available for anybody to read whenever they wanted to read it, a reader provided if they could not read. And of all things, on the title page was the name Cuthbert, a bishop. Who is he? He's none other than Bishop Tunstall, the man that had burned Tyndale's Bibles. Here's Tyndale's Bible in a new form, and his name is on the title page approving its publication. All of that happened with this great Bible in 1539, only 3 years after William Tyndale had burned to death at the stake. This brings us down to the King James Version of the Bible and its translation. Back in 1604, when it was agreed upon by King James, he appointed Richard Bancroft, who was then the Bishop of London and later became the Archbishop of Canterbury. He first selected 3 men to help him. Those 3 men were taken as academicians, first from the city of Oxford, then from here at Westminster, and then finally from Cambridge University. Their job then was to put together a collection of men who would be capable of undertaking the task. We don't know how many people were really involved in the translating. We know that there were between 50 and 60, but beyond that we really do not know. These men were then taken from the 3 different centres, Oxford, Cambridge, and at Westminster. They were divided into 2 different groups, those who were proficient in Greek and those who were proficient in Hebrew. They were then divided into these 3 different segments, constituting 6 different committees. Then the Bible was taken and it was divided up into 6 different parts, including the apocryphal books. These parts were then distributed equally between Oxford, Cambridge, and Westminster. And then the men went to work at doing their translating. Once a man had finished one of the jobs, he was then to read it before the entire committee and whatever was finally decided upon must be agreed upon by the committee. Sometimes they had to listen to as many as 13 variant readings of one particular passage before they made a decision. And then finally, their decisions being made, they handed all of their material down to 2 appointed men who gave the final editing to the work. These 2 men had made many changes. They then handed it over to Bancroft again, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Bancroft made 15 different changes after that. And that's how we finally got our King James Version of the Bible. You may ask the question, why have we spent so much time dealing with William Tyndale when our interest really is in the 1611 King James Version of the Bible? And the answer to that is that the King James Version of the Bible is permeated by William Tyndale. It's stated by those that have studied it that very little change was made either in the New Testament or in the Pentateuch on what William Tyndale had written. It came down virtually unchanged. The vast majority of scholars believe that 90% of both of those passages are really William Tyndale coming down. Imagine that. I mean, 50 to 60 of the greatest intellects of their day, 6 different years in 6 different committees, and what they have produced is very little changeable to what was given to us by William Tyndale. We can't pay a big enough tribute to William Tyndale. However, that brings us now to the fact that in 1611 we have a Bible in English approved by the King, the work of the scholars of their generation, and accepted worldwide. That's the story of our English Bible and how it came to us. That's the story of the men who were behind it and the price that they paid. Very difficult to look at the Bible without realizing every page was soaked in blood, and those letters ought to be printed in gold. I hope you own an English Bible. I hope you read it every day. God bless you.
We hope you enjoyed this moving video about the King James Bible, and God bless those dear souls who suffered and died so we could have a Bible in English. In 2011, the KJV Bible celebrated its 400-year anniversary. Today, 402 years later, Scorby.com is proud to announce the introduction of an all-new King James Bible app that can be downloaded to mobile devices the world over, giving millions instant access to the KJV Bible like never before. The new KJV Bible app, narrated by Alexander Scorby, is state-of-the-art, enabling you to quickly search for your favorite Bible verses and create playlists from those searches for instant access from your smartphone or tablet anytime, anywhere. God has always used man's inventions to speak to his people. This is the newest that God can use to speak to you today. Get your Scorby Bible app today and start enjoying the newest way to access the oldest book. Click the link below for complete details and see our app demos. Thanks for watching, and God bless you as you listen to His Word.